Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. In particular, I'd like to talk about a particular feature of thrown weapons that, as of the previous video, I hadn't coded. So there are several weapons that you can throw at your enemy in this game, and thus far, when you throw it, it's gone. It sort of disappears from the game. And that makes sense for some weapons. Certainly if you throw a grenade, you would imagine the grenade explodes and there's no more grenade. But it doesn't make sense for other weapons. If you throw a spear or something like that at an enemy, well, you don't have the spear anymore, but the spear is still there. Potentially, you could go to that space and pick up the spear and have a spear again. And I hadn't done anything to make that happen. There are some weapons that should behave like that, for example, machetes. So, as you can see, I've started a combat. I'm in my own inventory here, and I've got a sharp machete, and I can equip that to my main hand and get back to the main section. And then I can throw it. I'm here at distance 0, so I can throw it at enemy 2 or enemy 5. Let's try enemy 2 just because they've got slightly fewer hit points. And okay, that did pretty well. So far that's all the same as it has been in previous videos, but if we scroll down to where this enemy is, we can now see that the sharp machete is sort of visible where it should be. It's in that distance band that I threw it into. And so I should be able to sort of, if we could clear that area of enemies, I should be able to go in there and pick it up, although I haven't coded that bit yet. I've just coded the putting the weapon in the range band so that you know it's there. So that's what I've done, and as usual, I'm going to now move on to showing you the code that makes it happen. So if we're going to have thrown weapons as a presence in the virtual environment, we need to have some variable which keeps track of what weapons are where, if anything. And that is the new variable that we've added. We've also made a change to another variable, but I'll show you the new variable first. And the new variable is called thrown, $THRONE. Wait a minute. No, it's not. Sorry, that's the wrong thrown. $THROWN, of course. And we set that up as an array. Thrown 0 is going to be a single variable because we're going to use thrown slot 0 to keep track of how many weapons we're dealing with. But the others are going to be themselves arrays. So it's a two-dimensional array, with the exception that thrown 0 is just kept as that single variable. And there's a little explanation down here of what everything means. Thrown 0 is the highest slot of thrown which is in use. So it's however many, usually it's how many weapons are on the field, but when there's one, if there's one that gets picked up, we won't reduce that number because let's say we have 4 and we pick up the one in slot 2, we still need to look at slots 1 to 4 when we're, for example, displaying the battlefield and so on. Thrown Z1 is the type, the type of the Z such weapon, and then it says as per WEA_OVR. WEA_OVR, as you'll probably remember if you have been following this series, stands for Weapon Overview, and one of the things that it has is the names of weapons. So thrown Z1, it might have a value of 7. Let's say thrown 1-1 has a value of 7. That would indicate a pistol. just because the pistol is the 7th weapon in the list. And as well as keeping track of what weapon it is, we also need to keep track of where it is, of course, and that's in throne Z2. So throne 1-1 might have a value of 7, throne 1-2 might have a value of 2, something like that. The other thing we need to do is we need to distinguish between weapons which, or more specifically, attacks which involve throwing the weapon and the weapon is destroyed, which is basically how grenades work, and throwing the weapon and the weapon is gone, but it's gone from your hand, but it still exists, which is how throwing a broom works, throwing a machete. I think that's the two of them actually, the broom and the two types of machete, the sharp and the blunt machete. So we do that in WEA_ATT Z3, which is the slot to do with ammunition. So 0 is that this attack is striking with a weapon like a club or a sword or something like that. 1 is throwing the weapon and uses up the weapon. We've already coded this type of attack. This is the type of attack that grenades have, and we're going to keep them as they are, but we're now going to distinguish between grenade type of attacks and sort of spear type of attacks, let's say. And then we have 2 and 3, which use up units of ammunition, like that's like a gun. And we have a new type, which is 4, which is that you throw the weapon, but the weapon can then be picked up. So it's stored in this thrown array. And that's the sort of the relevant one for this video. And so we go through this WEA_ATT and we change the ones that need to be changed. That were 1, we change them to 4. So that's the broom and the 2 types of machetes, their throwing attack. And then down the bottom here we have the 2 types of grenades, which stay as they are because they are actually destroyed when you throw them. So dealing with ammunition and losing a weapon, etc., happens in PC side attacks. So that's the next thing we're going to look at. The relevant part of this code is the code that deals with ammunition or losing the weapon because it's a single-use weapon. And that happens down here, about, looks like sort of a quarter to a third of the way down. So we look at WEA_ATT_X. X is the attack that we happen to be using, because remember that these weapons, you can throw them, but you can also slash with them or poke with them or something like that. And so we don't want the weapon to disappear every time. We only want it to disappear when you're using that throwing attack. So if it equals 1, this is the code we already had. This is the single-use weapon. We just look in the relevant slot of the weapon array. Weapon is the type of the weapon that is in the acting character's hands. INI_who stands for who has initiative. Now, we don't change the ammunition level just because when we move something into that hand, we'll be changing the ammunition around anyway. So there'll be this sort of vestigial value in the ammunition slot, but it does. I think it's $ammo, but it doesn't matter. It'll never be used. It'll be overwritten before we ever use it. So we've already done that. This is the new code here. This is if WEA_ATT_X3 is equal to 4, which, as the note says, is a thrown but recoverable weapon. So down the bottom, we still set the relevant slot of the weapon array to 0 because you don't have your machete or your broom anymore, but there's a bunch of new code. First of all, we increment thrown 0. When we set up this array, we gave it a value we gave thrown 0 a value of 0 to indicate that there's no weapons that have been thrown lying around the battlefield. And now it'll increment the first time to 1, second time to 2, etc., etc. That's what plus plus means, just means add 1. Because this is an array, we say, well, have we defined this array? Have we defined the relevant slot of the array that we need to deal with yet? And that's if ndef, if not defined. If we look in the thrown array, and which slot do we look in? We look up thrown 0 to find that value. So the first time we do this, thrown 0 will have a value of 1, and therefore we'll look in thrown 1. The next time we'll look in thrown 2, thrown 3, etc. Obviously just adding new slots as we need them. So if it is not defined, then we set that slot of the array to itself be an array. The reason we need to set that to be an array is because we're going to store 2 different bits of information in there. That's what we do down here. We set thrown 0, 1 to be the number of the weapon. And we have to do that before we set the weapon to 0, because otherwise it'd be 0, and that would tell us that there are some fists lying in the battlefield, which obviously doesn't make sense. So we have to refer to weapon I underscore who before we set weapon I underscore who to 0. So we store the type of weapon, and then how do we know which range band it is? Well, Z is the target on this page. It's the number. So if Z is 5, we're throwing something at enemy 5. And one of the things we store about the enemies is their location. And we store that in $NME, which is an array which, of course, NME is short for enemy. So NME Z3 is the current location of enemy number Z. So we were targeting enemy Z. So, of course, the machete or whatever it is will be sent to the range band where the enemy currently is. So we're assuming there that, like you could imagine a situation where your throw is so bad that it goes into a different range band, but we're assuming that the range bands are fairly big, and so therefore that even if you miss, it still goes into the same range band sort of thing. You could have some sort of mechanic for if it's a really bad miss, maybe it goes into a different range band or something, but at the moment we're just saying, well, it ends up in the range band where the enemy is. And then finally we set the weapon to 0 because, of course, we have lost the weapon. We don't have it anymore. The other thing we need to do is that when we print the battlefield, we need to print that the weapon is there. And we do that in print distances, which is where we print, all the other stuff. As you've seen in this video and many others, we go through it printing distance 3, distance 2, distance 1, distance 0, and then in each of the distances we print all the enemies that are in there, or companions, or the player character, or in some cases, because we can have both companions and the player character. And then finally, this is the new code here. We have to look for every range band. We have to say, is there any thrown weapons in here? If so, print it. And I've decided to print it in a bracket so that you don't, just to distinguish it from a combatant. That doesn't matter because the idea of the final form of this game is that it'll be a visual display anyway. So this whole page is just a testing thing. It's not actually meant to be how it's going to be in the end. So we have a for loop which goes from 1 to thrown 0, because remember thrown 0 is how many weapons we're dealing with. And we look in thrown W2 because that's the location, and if it equals X, and X is the current range band that we're dealing with, so we go through each range band and then within that we do what we're talking about here. If that's the case, that means that weapon is lying on the ground in this range band, and so we print bracket, a big bit of code which I'll explain separately because it's a bit complicated, and then another bracket and a line break. So it's bracket name of the weapon, end bracket. So how do we get the name of the weapon? Well, let's have a look. It's WEA underscore OVR something something. WEA underscore OVR is weapon overview. It's details of the weapon, including the name of the weapon. It's stuff that isn't specific to a type of attack. So it's not the damage, but it is the name, for example, or the range even, but it is the name of the weapon. So it's WEA underscore OVR, and in here we want the type of the weapon, and in here, the second one, we want 0, because WEA underscore OVR something 0 is the name of the weapon. So for example, WEA underscore OVR 70 is the name of the 7th weapon, which is a pistol. So how do we find the name of the weapon? How do we get this bit? Well, we go thrown W1. So thrown is the array that keeps track of thrown weapons. We've seen that. Thrown W1 is the type of the Wth thrown weapon. So we've already seen that thrown W2 is equal to X. So this, we know that weapon W is in this particular range band. And what type of weapon is it? Well, we look at the other part of thrown W. We look at thrown W1. So this just gives us the name of the weapon. And then we go WEA underscore OVR, in other words, weapon overview, the number of the weapon 0, and that is the name of the weapon. So that line of code there is just print a bracket, print the name of the weapon, print an end bracket, and then print a line break. So we get what we got in the example, which in that case was, I think, machete, bracket, blunt, end bracket. I probably should put a bit of code in here so that instead of saying machete, blunt, it says blunt machete, and instead of saying machete, bracket, sharp, end bracket, it says sharp machete. But I'll do that later. There are also a couple of other quite important things, I guess, not sort of quality of life things that I haven't done yet. First of all, there's nothing, we need to be able to pick up the weapon, right? There's no code for picking up the weapon. So I need to deal with that. And secondly, remember that the range bands are relative. In other words, 0 is always wherever the player character is. If the player character advances or retreats, we don't say that the player character is now in range, they've moved from range band 0 to 1 or from 0 to -1. We instead just say, well, now range band 0 is the one, the new one, right? So what that means is, if we say that the weapon's in range band 3 and then the player character moves, well, now we need it to be in range band 2 or range band 4, depending on which way the player character has moved. Because we haven't done that, if I had moved the player character, it would have looked like the weapon moved, which of course is not what we want. We want it to stay still. So those are the two things that I'll probably be doing in the videos immediately to come. There's quite a lot of extra weapon stuff. I'm sort of dealing with what I'm dealing with now is basically the special characteristics of weapons that I haven't yet done. I've done sort of the standard attacks, I guess, and how damage works and ammunition and stuff like that. But there's some like little quirks of particular weapons. That's what I'm currently adding, starting with this being able to pick up thrown weapons. So I'll leave it there for now. As I say, the next couple of videos are going to be about dealing with thrown weapons, recovering them, and making sure that they stay where they're meant to be. But I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.